Hey everyone, and welcome back to another news video. Today it's a pretty interesting one about Star Wars and EA's mishandling of the franchise. First, I want to mention a quick thing about the previous video though. A lot of my goal there was to explain why that $15 million exists and their thinking behind it. To be very clear in my personal opinion, people like Iwata are those who have led by example, taking personal pay cuts whenever their company does not do that well. It could just be a thing with American corporate culture versus that of places like Japan and Korea, but to be very clear, yeah, when the company's doing bad, I think the leaders need to lead. They need to take personal pay cuts. At the end of the day, when their employees look up the chain and they see things happening like that, it's just not good. So that's my thoughts on that. Let's get into the new news. Well, the saga of EA's tenure as the exclusive Star Wars console game publisher and developer continues to be rocky. For fans of the Star Wars games, it has not been a great time, which is especially sad given the state of the Star Wars games in the past. There are so many memorable titles from the LucasArts era. X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter, the Starfighter games, Battlefront 1, Battlefront 2, Empire at War, Jedi Academy, hell, even Pod Racer was pretty decent. Of course, as time went on, LucasArts themselves began to slip in quality, and their game development operations were of course shuttered. Things would change though when Star Wars was purchased by Disney. Likely knowing that they wanted video game tie-ins, they struck an exclusive contract with EA Games for EA to handle, well, the game side of the franchise, and it was a 10-year contract. Well, for people who like good games, it's been a travesty. Star Wars Battlefront launched too early. It was clearly very low in both its scope and its content. And while it was an accessible and sometimes fun shooter that absolutely looked just stunning visually, the overall package wasn't up to snuff. Why did that happen? Well, it was pretty much rushed out along for, the release of The Force Awakens. And being real with you, I can't totally understand why the exec types would want to do something like that, but at the end of the day, it clearly damaged the quality of their product. And that's a damning thing to say, because that's asking for people's hard-earned money. For most people who have a family or a busy career, money can be tight, and if the money isn't tight, then chances are time probably is. So either way, to have the gall to waste those things of your audience, yeah, it shows a lack of consideration and a lack of respect for the consumer. So that was a disaster, but there's many more. What happened next? Well, Star Wars Battlefront 2, a game that caused so much drama that Jim Sterling was able to fund his own space program from it. But being seriously, the loot box system of that game at launch was beyond the pale. It took the piss so much and to such a degree that it got the regulatory systems of multiple countries involved. Much to the annoyance of the rest of the industry, who for the most part were content to not push the boat out as far, but still get most of the financial benefits. Now, look, I don't like loot boxes, but we're in a world where they're trucking along. All it really took was one publisher to be extra greedy to push out the boat, and that kind of risked collapsing the whole thing for everyone else who was making money off them. Now, the game also didn't have a massive amount of content, and while its space fighting segments were cool, it still didn't really capture what people loved about Battlefront 2 and its hybrid dogfighting and capital ship boarding game mode. So, that's really what happened. EA signed this 10-year contract, and in 10 years we've had two mediocre shooters that have underperformed, both critically and commercially. Of course, we've also had the likes of Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, a wildly successful mobile title. Now, interestingly, I was actually at a Unity dev talk from the people pulling that off, just about how they did their visual effects and mobile hardware, and it was all very impressive to me and very cool, and the tech behind it was pretty cool as well. But, as much as that's accomplished, it's never a game I'd play. It's yet another microtransaction farm on mobile. No. So, it's clearly a bad situation. A really bad one. EA obviously planned to release more, but those plans have not came to fruition. Just before their deal was struck, we heard of the death of LucasArts game development, and that had taken out Star Wars 1313. Now, this is a game where you would have played as a sort of bounty hunter, scoundrel type in the underbelly of Coruscant. Interestingly, this is a theme that will come back later. So, EA got their new Battlefront series rolling with DICE. They then attempted to get multiple other projects off the ground in various different studios. So far, 0 of these have came to fruition, and the ones that we know about have been cancelled. So, well, some of them. So first, the Visceral Games situation. They ended up bringing on Amy Hennig, who was one of the key people behind Uncharted, a very respected, noted industry vet. She led Visceral Games in the creation of a linear action-adventure Star Wars title. Now, this ended up being a development mess, actually ending with Visceral Games being shut down in 2017. Why? Well, this game, Project Ragtag, wasn't coming together in the way that EA would have liked. Hennig's team had made a number of demos that they thought would impress EA, including an AT-ST chase sequence, a shootout, and a rescue mission from Jabba's palace. Basically, a gameplay sampler of all the different sort of core awesome moments that they would want to deliver across the whole game experience. Supposedly, these demos were actually quite cool, but there's a lot more at play. First, EA was not particularly interested in one-shot linear narrative games that did not have multiplayer and opportunities for future monetization. To the players, that's awful. I mean, games like Uncharted, God of War, and The Last of Us have been some of the best experiences in the medium of games over the last few years. Interestingly, though, they are all first-party games from Sony. So why? Well, they're system sellers. Those games are brand ambassadors for PlayStation. They actually have value beyond their direct financial return. And that's why you see Sony be more willing to make games like that, and that's why a third-party publisher really won't want to do that. Unlike Sony, EA is not making money off PlayStation Plus and PlayStation Store revenue. So for somebody like Sony, if you purchase God of War, yeah, they get some money, but then they also get continued revenue through PS Plus and purchase of other titles on the platform. Okay, that's a bit of a tangent, but that's basically some of the differences in the economic incentives between first and third-party publishers that kind of explains why a third party is going to be less willing to do an Uncharted-like game. So that's not all, though, because while Hennig's game is the most well-known thing that was going on there, they're actually trying to make a Star Wars game before that. So when EA announced their Disney deal, Visceral dropped their current project and they moved on to a new one called Numa. This would have been a space scoundrel game where you could, in Han Solo fashion, explore the galaxy. You would have linear style shooting on ground, and then they kind of said Black Flag in space, according to a staffer. Seems pretty cool, but when Visceral's Battlefield project was going through hard times, developers were pulled off this project, and that slowed down its process and tanked morale. Then Amy Hennig joined in 2014 and initially worked on Battlefield Hardline's narrative before moving over to Star Wars. At this point, it seemed quite clear that Yuma wasn't really going anywhere, and that Hennig really did not want to make a big open-world-ish space game. So they cancelled it and they started working on a new title called Ragtag. This is a narrative linear action game that supposedly had a, quote, cracked mirror version of Han Solo as its protagonist, and that would also come along with a crew of interesting side characters. Schreier's sources from 2017 really do paint an image of this being quite a cool setup. Now, EA wanted to make it different from Uncharted, and that led to the team working on advanced mechanics, such as having multiple team members with a range of different abilities who you could all control and work together with an advanced AI system for when they weren't being player-controlled. Now, time went on, there were leadership and management structure changes to actually be a little bit more like Naughty Dog, and then a split in the company between two teams. One was doing Battlefield Hardline expansions, and the other one was working in Ragtag. So the people who were doing Battlefield DLC understandably felt like they got the short end of the stick. They were not on the hotshot project, but, time would go on, and time is money. In San Francisco, things are extremely expensive, with the costs of employment being nearly double the industry average, especially as compared to the cheaper Canadians with their tax benefit schemes from the government that they just don't have in California. And because of this, Visceral looked less and less enticing to EA. Now, if things had have been smooth, this probably would have been fine. But they weren't smooth. Much like with BioWare, the team were struggling with the Frostbite engine, which EA had mandated across all of their studios. They had to build in new engine features, including things that Hennig would have been working with on a far older game like Uncharted 1. That's just the state that Frostbite was in. Now, combined with bureaucracy and increasing tension over the direction of the game between Visceral and EA, things were slow and expensive, and this eventually led to the studio being shut down, with Ragtag being cancelled. Development then shifted over to Vancouver, where they began work on a new open-world game that was basically totally different to Ragtag as a game, but did reuse some assets. This new project was codenamed Orca. So yeah, we went from 1313, a bounty hunter action game. They went from that to a sort of bounty hunting open world Han Solo game, then to a scoundrel action adventure linear game, and we're now back to a sort of scoundrel open world game. It's just interesting how many years and how many millions of dollars have went into producing some form of non-Jedi themed Star Wars game. Anyway, this new open world project was started in 2017, and the new news is it's now dead. But unlike the situation with Visceral Games where it was shut down, nobody has been laid off and the studios still exist. It was decided that Orca was just too large and that it would have been well into the early 2020s before it would actually be on store shelves, potentially something like 2022. So a big, like 5-year-ish development process. Well, actually, I mean, yeah, about 5 years, whatever. EA, though, decided they wanted to have something out sooner, so they started a new Star Wars game project in the same studio that, according to Schreier's sources, is set for a late 2020 launch. Why do this? Well, there is speculation that that is more in line with the next console generation's release. Additionally, yeah, companies do value short-term bumps in their finances, and it's fair to say that EA are going through a bit of a rough patch right now with things like, say, Battlefield underperforming. So, as for the rest of the lineup, well, the Old Republic just doesn't seem to be doing that well right now. Respawn, the Titanfall studio headed by ex-Infinity Ward leads, is also working on a Star Wars project. I've heard 2020 rumors, but I don't think there's that much solid information about their project yet. And really, I suppose EA are just trying to salvage things as they move into the latter half of their 10-year contract. And of course, 10-year contracts ending early, well, they're all the rage these days because of the Bungie news. Now, I doubt we'll see an early exit, but I can't imagine that Disney are happy with the state of the Star Wars video games, and I mean, hell, also the slowdown of the movies, including the likely cancellation of the Rian Johnson trilogy and of, I think, all the planned anthology movies. Because of that, I'm actually wondering if EA also feel like Star Wars is less important, with really much of their future lineup missing the movies entirely. We then also need to think about the contract terms. We don't know what they are, of course, but it does, EA didn't get their license for free. These games probably have to sell a massive number of copies to make EA serious money after they have their revenue split that I assume they have with Disney. I mean, that's something that really did the rounds when the new Battlefront sales were being reported. So overall, it seems like this is not a particularly lucrative thing for either party. Battlefront 2, I think, is a failure. I think Battlefront 1 was also a failure. The only thing that seems to have actually worked out is the mobile game. And that is just a bit sad, especially because the projects that have been cancelled, the ones that have not made it out, yeah, they have seemed like the most creative and most interesting ones. But of course, we don't know the internals. We can only really speculate. All I'll say is, for people who have liked the Star Wars games in the past, and that definitely does include me, a lot of the childhood games that I played were that, I remember playing Jedi Academy in the local LAN center on PC and having a great time. So it is sad that, that's going on, but that's pretty much where we're at. It just does seem like it's another case of a big publisher mismanaging things, studios mismanaging things, not having clear directions, and perhaps things being strung along too long. Companies may be getting sunk cost fallacies, developing things for an extra year when they really weren't sure if they should have been developing them at all. It seems like the Hennig project went through a lot of money and a lot of time when really the publisher wasn't particularly sure it was a good idea. And all of this just does scream of a lack of direction and mismanagement. At least that's my personal take. Let me know what you think down below. Of course, we will be back for more content in the very near future. There's been some really major stuff going on. So be sure to sub to check out that. Thank you very much for supporting the channel, and I will see you next time.